That David was anointed king in chapter 16 and then went back to shepherding sheep in chapter 17 actually makes perfect sense when you think about it. I can envision David's father Jesse saying to Samuel, asking him after he's anointed David king, okay, now what do we do? And I can imagine Samuel saying, just go back to doing what you did before. God's the one who called David, and when God is ready, he'll raise him up. The first time I heard someone say to me that I would be a good pastor, I was 16 years old, and I openly laughed. Furthest thing from my mind. And it wasn't until I was 26, more than a decade or so later, that I finally began to hear God's call, I want you to be a pastor. All this to say, there is usually a long gap of time between God's call on a person's life and the fulfillment of that calling. Just because David was anointed king at this point, does that mean he was ready to be king? Not at all. He had a lot of growing up to do, and his family had a lot of catching up to do with the idea that this was their brother's destiny. And I can picture a setting where they're at the dinner table, and David asks for the mashed potatoes to get passed to him. And Eliab, his oldest brother, says, oh, His Majesty wants the mashed potatoes. Please pass them for the king. Can you picture that? You know, they have to get used to this new world they're in. I'm sure they struggled with this. It's not unreasonable to think that a lot of time has elapsed between chapter 16 and chapter 17 because, as we said earlier, David's still being trained. David needed extra time in the wilderness shepherding his father's sheep so that he could learn how to be a shepherd of his heavenly Father's flock. Just like Luke Skywalker. Did he not need training? Yes? Before he could face his Goliath, Darth Goliath. That's what's going on here. This is where David's faith begins to grow. It's in the wilderness that David learned to place his faith and trust in God. It's in the wilderness, shepherding sheep, that he learned that with God's help, he could overcome a foe bigger than himself. And so as David comes before Saul in verse 31, what we're meant to see is that David's training is now complete, and he is ready to step onto the public stage. And I'm sure that David's royal words of faith had impact even on Saul's heart as he spoke them. And listen here to the voice of faith. You want to know what faith sounds like? Here it is. Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear and took a lamb from the flock, I went after him, and I struck him, and I delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard, struck him, and killed him. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistines. And Saul has nothing to say except to yield before David's passion. See, anchored by his love for God and his trust in God, David, with the weapons of a shepherd, heads to the battlefield to get his people unstuck. Goliath mocks him as he approaches, shouting all the lies and venom that he'd been heaping on the people. Now he heaps them on him. But David, you notice, doesn't quiver. He shouts right back to him. Verses 45 to 47, hear the words of the king again. Hear the voice of faith. This is what faith sounds like. And what Andrew would not read, I'm going to read now because the kids are gone. And David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves, not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand. Just me reading it, does your heart not soar? And my friends, if your Goliath is fear, then you have to shout to your fear just like that. Fear, I'm cutting off your head. You're not ruling my life any longer.